Faisal, welcome to College Freedom Forum 2024, hosted by Universidad Francisco Marroquin in Guatemala.
Thank you so much for having me.
How would you describe yourself in brief words for everybody to know what you are about?
I'm mostly very much interested in the intersection of technology, human rights, and human freedom. And that came into me in the journey from Iraq and now, right now, in the United States. And it's an ongoing journey.
Please tell us a bit about yourself, about this journey that you have made to become an activist. How did that start?
Now, like I think about it, like now in hindsight, is that to some extent I was forced to be an activist. And I mean, I grew up first under the regime of Saddam Hussein, so that's my childhood. And my first experience with authoritarianism was really being told by my parents that everything that is said inside the house cannot be said outside, because out of four people is one in the intelligence services. So your friend could be intelligence, your family, everybody could be, every outsider or even sometimes insider is part of the regime. So that's my first experience, and I was like 8, 9 years old when that happened. And then because my dad is a orthopedic surgeon, we had to. I'm originally from Babylon, so like the same Babel mentioned in the Bible. And we moved to Baghdad, and the neighborhood we used to live in was many of it for the former regime of Saddam Hussein. Then America came, and then that regime was removed.
How old were you when that happened?
12, and so I do have a very good memory of both before the war and after the war. My neighborhood shifted from kind of a residential neighborhood and mostly like educated academics or even sometimes pro-regime people into absolute chaos. And many of the people who were part of the former regime start forming militias and gangs, etc. Namely, the most famous one was Al-Qaeda, which took over my neighborhood from roughly 2004 to up to 2009. So in a way, is that living under Al-Qaeda and before that living under Saddam Hussein, really, both of these gives you only two options. You either submit to them or you fight them. And I guess I'm one of those who decided like, that enough is enough and we have to take a stance, even though we were young and crazy at the time. But I think it's something that needs to be done. Otherwise, living under authoritarianism, in both cases, whether it's the Saddam side or the Al Qaeda side, is not something worth living under.
You were very young to make that drastic decision. Was there any inciting incident that led you to decide, as you said, enough is enough?
It's ongoing. I mean, to give you like some stories or what's like living there is that we used to take a minibus from my house to the high school, and in some occasions the minibus has to stop by dead bodies that Al Qaeda put in, and for us to actually either walk over these dead people to go to school or go back home. So like in the first time you experience that, and then you get emotionally shocked. But after a while, I started becoming desensitized. That's always been like the feeling that I hated. Is that I don't want, like, there's a part of my brain, I guess, that want to normalize this and that's really what most Iraqis had to deal with. And there's a part of me that was fighting that kind of feeling of numbness that I was feeling. So that's, I would say, was kind of the start of it, was like just seeing the death and the destruction that many of these groups and the chaos that came after the war. Then it started like expedited more and more when myself, there was a time when Al Qaeda was killing academics. So anyone who's a professor or a teacher of some sort was a target for them to kill, and sometimes they killed their children. So around early 2007, I was just going to go to the bakery, and then Al Qaeda stopped to come to kidnap me. On a lucky situation, there was a U.S. Humvee passing by at the same time, and many of these guys went back to the car and they left. And I froze at the time, so I really froze when that was happening, and that really expedited. I was like, "There's like no way I can just," because even if you don't do anything, like in my case, like I was not active at all or semi-active. Even if you don't do much, you get killed. So I was like, you know what? Might as well do something. If I'm gonna get killed anyway, might as well I live with dignity and at least fight for the values I believe in, then just die in like a suicide bomber attack. And at the time, it's like my value of my own life was very little. So like, it's like just to die. I was like, I'd rather die with dignity than like just get shot by one of the Al Qaeda members.
What are one of the first wins or successes in your activism career that led you to think, I'm on the right track? This is what I should be doing.
I mean, during the kind of the U.S., I guess, kind of invasion, war, liberation, depends who you ask right now in Iraq, is that one of my, I guess, pride is that I translated some parts of the U.S. Constitution into Arabic. So that was, I would say, my first act of activism with a couple of my friends in high school. And mostly we were focused. I mean, there's a lot of the U.S. Constitution that is not like it's one about gun rights and stuff like that. So which we already had in Iraq to some extent. But the most one is the related to First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech and religion. Then I was like talking about it to my friends in high school. So that's I would say is my first act. And during that period, I was reading a lot about kind of, I mean, we got invaded by the US and we had no idea what the US is. So I started like digging into like who are the founding fathers and who founded America and what the America was founded on. So I was in my teenage years engulfed in the ideas of Rousseau and John Stuart Mill and all of that. So I was like speaking about them. So that was my first activism. 10 years later, I built a team of 120 translators that does Arabic, Farsi, Kurdish, and Pashto. That up to today, I think, translated 44 million words of classical liberal materials into all of these languages, doing them on mass scale with roughly, I think, 8.6 million subscribers all across the region from Iraq all the way to Morocco. So it started with like simple act of translating here and there into now building an entire institution that makes these ideas accessible to the masses.
That is impressive. Going from translating the first article of the Constitution of the United States to more than millions of words. So you started on this path. What led you to think, all right, this is it, this is okay, this has started as a high school activity, but when do you think it became your calling?
I would say there was no specific moment per se, until, I mean, I realized that like you cannot bomb democracy and freedom into people. So we had this dictatorship, which was kind of a prison, and then let's say the head of the prison was removed, which was Saddam Hussein. And then we get to ultimate chaos. And most of the people had no access to any ideas of democracy before that. So when democracy was sort of imposed on us or by force, most people thought democracy is that I'm going to vote for my sect and my tribe to kill the other tribe. They had no understanding of democratic principles, coexistence, all of that. So my first act of, say, of translation, or particularly make knowledge accessible about these ideals, was mostly based on the fact is that even if you kind of bring these ideas by force, as what happens in the case of Iraq, they don't really crystallize because the people themselves don't understand what they mean. And like, what is freedom of speech? What is the rights? Because freedom of speech means unpopular opinions and the fact that the government cannot jail you for that. Many people in Middle East don't understand that. They think that, oh, the government responsibility or the religious institutions have a right to jail people for saying the wrong opinion, etc. So I think is that really seeing, I guess being from Iraq is both a curse and a privilege, was like seeing like how forcing these ideas into people never works. So when I started like, again, with a small scale in high school, seeing that if you really spend the time to actually get people, at least those who first agree with you, and then eventually to those who don't know about these ideas, slowly then people start believing these ideas are actually good and they work. So seeing like all of that just in real life. So one of my first actions when I moved to a free country, which is the United States, is to actually how to scale what I was doing. Because I saw even there were people like believing in this or translating. So there was already kind of unorganized movements of people who believe in these ideas. And I just institutionalized it under one umbrella.
So what I'm hearing is the massive intervention of the United States did not lead to an immediate nation building, as what they would say. But for you, it started with reading and translating and talking amongst yourselves. That's how Ideas Beyond Borders grew.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So really, I mean, just taking my journey of like seeing, I mean, I've seen how good ideas can change the world, but also seen how bad ideas can change the world. And seeing like the ideas of Al-Qaeda and the extremists and the communists who also have significant, the history of Iraq in like one sentence is that We used to be under the kingdom, which was the British supported. Then the king was killed by the communists, and then the socialists killed the communists, and then the Americans came in and killed the socialists. That's really the history of Iraq from the fall of the Ottoman Empire until 2003. So really, we never had any concept of peaceful transition of power. I believe in 2005 was the first time that the new leader did not kill the leader before, and he gave him the keys to the. So that's like the history of Iraq 101. And as a result of like really growing in that environment and seeing like that if people, we need to actually start from the beginning, and that's what Ideas Beyond Borders is. Like we need to really build the knowledge base in which people have access to this information on a massive scale, and which is also digestible. As other than, I mean, for those of us who spent hours reading Hayek and Milton Friedman, etc., and many of these ideas are good, especially if you are educated. But how about if you want it to the mass public who probably don't understand the differences between Keynesian economics and so part of the job is that not only making these ideas available, but also accessible. So we start investing. Now we have a massive media team that does short videos and podcasts and all that stuff, and reaching people where they are. And here's the coolest story that I'm really, and that's what I came to Antigua Forum for a couple of months ago, was that many of the people who started not adhering, but listening to our ideas were like, okay, now business and entrepreneurship, etc. They're like, we want to start a business. I mean, you're talking about all of these ideas about entrepreneurship and the power of the private sector, etc. We want to actually start a business and have some of them have small ideas and small businesses to expand. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So now, not the ideas that we've been spreading is actually now seeing that people want to take action as well of the exposure. And then I talked to a couple of people and a couple donors, etc. And we started following the George Mason Emergent Ventures model of like trying to support these businesses. And now in Ideas Beyond Borders, we have both the education part, which is now 8.7 million followers, and we have the business part in which we support many startups and businesses for people to take action in their own hands. And there's one cool story that I really love is that what I do like about the whole like business entrepreneurship is that now many of these people feel they have a say in the countries they live in. According to so many polls around the Middle East, the number one thing that most people in the region, the youth, want is leave the country. But when they have businesses and they have startups in these places and there's funding accessibility, etc., now many people are like, you know what, I want to stay. I don't want to immigrate. I don't want to end up in Australia or New Zealand, etc. So really, like in some occasions, that you give some people some little push, and they can do miracles. And that's really what always keeps me motivated with the work I'm doing.
Well, it sounds great, and it is very reassuring for me that beyond the governments that their destiny is what you said, Iraq has people like you that are truly the foundation and the continuity of the great country. And
Hopefully.
yes, and to that youth and to that future of Iraq, what would be your message if you were now talking to your 19, 20-year-old self? What would be the message that you think you need to hear?
My message would be, I mean, Iraq being the cradle of civilization, as sometimes called, we have always been at a crossroads between different empires to different regimes, etc. And my message to many of the people there, which I actually wrote about recently, is that it's time for us to take ownership of our own lives and not be either sucking up to the imperial powers of the region or the imperial powers of outside, and really kind of take ownership. And my message also is that don't give up, or also don't get into the victimhood mentality. Is that unfortunately many people of my older generation who, as a result of suffering what we have suffered or others, they moved into conspiratorial mindset. I can never make it. It's always difficult. And that's true. The thing is that, but is it difficult enough that nothing can change in the future? The answer is no. And we're seeing that a lot of people who have the potential and have the energy to be like, you know what? Yes, we've lived under wars. Yes, we've had a lot. But if we don't change our countries, nobody else is going to change for us. And we already have the living examples of formerly the socialist regime, which offered they're going to make the country heaven, and they failed at doing that. And then the Americans came in, removed that regime, also offering us nation building and all of that stuff. We didn't get that either. So really, eventually somebody from that land who actually believe in entrepreneurship, believe in freedom, has to take leadership and build the country. So I think that my message to the people who not currently follow us, but those who follow us is I'm here on your side.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.